Carlos Ghosn.
Carlos Ghosn.
Carlos Ghosn.
Carlos Ghosn, a fugitive who's been talking for the first time about his escape from Japan.
Carlos Ghosn was the world-renowned CEO who saved Nissan from bankruptcy, brought us legendary cars like the Nissan GT-R, and spearheaded one of the largest automotive alliances on the planet. Now, he's an international fugitive, wanted by Interpol and the Japanese authorities. So how does a star businessman, someone who has studied in college textbooks and even featured in Japanese manga, go from being an automotive titan to a hunted criminal? Well, it has to do with the 2008 financial crisis, Carlos Ghosn's suspiciously high salary, and a possible conspiracy of Nissan executives and the Japanese authorities colluding to end Ghosn's career. So let's take a look at Carlos Ghosn's rise to power at Nissan and the events that led to his eventual downfall. I'm Guff, this is Alban, let's get started. Before we jump into it, we're giving away $1,000 to a random subscriber, so make sure you subscribe and you're entered to win. Carlos Ghosn started his career at Michelin, the largest tire manufacturer in Europe, in 1978. He became a plant manager in 1981. Then he worked his way up to head of R&D for the industrial division by 1984. And by 1985, at just 30 years old, he was appointed as COO of Michelin South America. At the time, Michelin South America's team had been very unprofitable, and it was Ghosn's task to turn it around. And in just 2 years, Carlos Ghosn brought the South America division back into the black. By 1990, he was CEO of Michelin North America. Ghosn credited his success at Michelin to his cross-cultural management tactics. Ghosn stated that you learn from diversity but are comforted by commonality. And at this point, Ghosn had established himself as a successful businessman, so it was time to set out and look for a new challenge. In 1996, Ghosn was hired as the executive vice president at Renault, a French car manufacturer. And he was thrown immediately into the fire because Renault was on the cusp of bankruptcy. And by the end of 1997, just 1 year later, Renault was back to being profitable thanks to Ghosn's restructuring of the company. Carlos Ghosn was quickly proving himself as the whiz kid when it came to turning companies around. They even began calling him Le Cost Killer at Renault thanks to his precise restructuring methods that cut out all the fat to maximize profits. And so Ghosn thought, let's do another one. So in 1999, Ghosn and Renault purchased a 36.8% stake in Nissan and formed the Renault-Nissan Alliance. This alliance had Ghosn maintain his position at Renault while becoming the COO of Nissan. And of course, just like every other company prior to Ghosn's arrival, Nissan was struggling. They were in the hole over $20 billion in interest-bearing debt. And it became quickly apparent to Carlos Ghosn that Nissan had no idea what they were doing. Nissan sold 46 car models in Japan, and only 3 of them were profitable. So in October of the same year, Ghosn introduced the Nissan Revival Plan. In this plan, he promised that Nissan would become profitable by the following year, and that the company debt would be reduced by 50% by 2002, just 3 years later. And he went so far as to vow that he would resign if he didn't meet those goals. How did he do it? Well, let's just say this plan really cemented his reputation as Le Cost Killer. Ghosn cut 21,000 jobs at Nissan, shut down 3 assembly plants, closed 2 manufacturing plants, cut off half of their suppliers, and sold off massive Nissan assets like their aerospace unit. And guess what? He didn't have to resign, because he met all of his goals. Nissan was finally on track for real profitability, and Ghosn was promoted to CEO of Nissan, and his success was now recognized globally. In 2002, Fortune magazine called him Businessman of the Year. In 2003, they ranked him as one of the 10 most powerful businessmen in the world. But it wasn't just the cost cutting that got him this level of success. It was also his ability to battle against Japanese business customs and culture. He eliminated seniority-based promotions and no longer guaranteed lifetime employment for workers unless a certain level of performance was achieved. As you can imagine though, not everyone was pleased with this culture shock. Ghosn may have saved Nissan, sure, but he did it by putting people out of jobs and breaking long-standing tradition. It was even reported that Ghosn changed Nissan's official language from Japanese to English. This irked a lot of people at Nissan, but at the time, it was hard to deny the man's success. Up until now, he made Michelin see big profits, turned turned Renault completely around and now restructured the entire company of Nissan, all of which were deemed impossible before his leadership. By 2003, Nissan announced that they were out of debt completely, and their operating profit exceeded 11%, up from 1% in 1999. And in 2005, Nissan announced that they had sold 3.6 million vehicles that year, which was 1 million vehicles more than just 4 years prior. Gowin was doing so well at Nissan that in 2005, they promoted him to CEO of Renault as well. He became the CEO of 2 Fortune 500 companies at the same time, the first person to ever do this in the world. Carlos Ghosn was well and truly unstoppable. But Lacoste Killer's unstoppable success, of course, had to come to a stop.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
The NASDAQ, everything and more has been completely wiped out.
Traders say this is the craziest day they have ever seen in these markets.
2008, the world financial crisis. Businesses across the planet were in the dumps, and the automotive industry was no exception. Gowin's grueling work that he put in over the last 9 years was slowly unraveling before his eyes, so he had to do something, and fast. He played some interesting cars, including in 2009 releasing the Nissan GTR, Nissan's first supercar in years. And 1 year later, in 2010, Gowin told the world that EVs were the future and released the Nissan Leaf. That was an unprecedented move, 2 years even before the Tesla Model S. But it wasn't enough. Nissan was struggling to claw back market share. Yet, in 2011, a very confident Carlos Ghosn announced at a press conference that Nissan would be rocketing out of the recession and increasing their global market share from just 5.8% to 10% over the next 8 years. He made it sound so simple, but behind the scenes, Gowin was taking some drastic measures. His plan was to set impossibly high sales targets for Nissan dealers and offer huge cash bonuses for anyone that could hit them. And every time they hit those sales numbers, the target would be raised again, something Gowin called the stair-step method. Realistically, very few dealers could hit those targets, but those cash bonuses were too good to just pass up. All this led to was dealers having insane discounts at the end of every month just to hit those sales targets, because those cash bonuses were huge paydays for dealers, far more than the profit from actually selling the cars themselves. It even got to the point where dealers themselves bought their own cars at the end of the month and then just held on to them for 2 or 3 months and then listed them again as used cars, all in the name of hitting Gowin's sales targets and getting those fat bonuses. Of course, that money had to come from somewhere, and Nissan was paying out all of these bonuses to dealers who weren't actually making Nissan any money. Add to that the fact that in 2016, Nissan bought a controlling share of Mitsubishi to save Mitsubishi's failing business, despite the fact that Nissan themselves were struggling to keep their own business afloat. And that all led to Nissan's profits being eaten up by bigger and bigger margins every year. All the while though, Gowin wanted a higher and higher salary, something the executive board wasn't very happy with. He argued that if Nissan didn't pay him the big bucks, then there was no reason for him to jump ship and just go to Ford or GM where he could make way more money. Regardless, by 2017, Nissan's global market share was up to 9.2%, nearly the 10% goal that Carlos Ghosn promised just 8 years earlier. But profits, those were a totally different story. In 2018, Nissan reported that profits were down 44.6% from the previous year, with net income down 57.3%. Yet despite that, Carlos Ghosn's salary had ballooned to $16.9 million a year, making him one of the highest paid executives in Japan. All this was a massive blow to the company and a stark wake-up call that Carlos Ghosn's magic was long gone. And all the while, Carlos Ghosn was making moves to merge Nissan and Renault, despite the Japanese board members' opposition. That meant that Nissan and Renault would become one company. This was a legacy play, a way to ensure that the alliance, which was Ghosn's finest achievement, would never be broken, even after he retired. That same year, interestingly enough, was the year that Carlos Ghosn was arrested. On a chilly November day in Tokyo, Carlos Ghosn's jet touched down at the airport, just in time for a Nissan executive meeting. But waiting for him on the tarmac was not the usual chauffeur and limousine. Rather, it was the Japanese authorities and an arrest warrant. Carlos Ghosn was arrested right as he got off the plane on charges of financial misconduct. The charges specifically were for failing to report $80 million in income over various years in the last decade, as well as charges of taking personal investment losses and dumping them into the lap of Nissan. The prosecutors claimed to have evidence direct from Nissan's books, and Goen faced up to 10 years in prison and a fine of 10 million yen. But Goen insisted on his innocence, saying that every financial decision he ever made was approved by the Nissan board. And where was Nissan's board in all this? Well, you might think that they were swiftly coming into Goen's side to back him up and get him out of police custody. This was their standing chairman after all, and the face of Nissan for the last 20 years. But no, they were nowhere to be seen. But just 3 days after his arrest, the board had an emergency meeting and voted to dismiss Goen as the chairman of the company. 4 days after that, the Mitsubishi board, which were now also part of the alliance, voted him off their board as well. And just like that, in a matter of a week, Goen was no longer one of Japan's top executives. His entire world was flipped upside down. He went from a corporate luxury jet to a Japanese prison cell, waiting for what was to come next. And wait, he did. For 108 days in solitary confinement. Yes, the Japanese government put Goen, an international CEO accused of a non-violent crime, in solitary confinement for over 3 months. He was allowed a half hour every day to go outside and was supposedly interrogated for up to 14 hours per session without his lawyers present. And let me reiterate, he was accused of this crime, not found guilty for it. Goen's trial wasn't even scheduled until 2021. For those of us watching from the US, this might actually seem like a blatant disregard for someone's rights, but apparently in Japan, this is standard practice. Goen finally managed to make bail in March of 2019, only to be arrested again in April on new charges of financial misconduct. It seemed like the Japanese government had no intention of loosening their grip on Carlos Goen, despite the relatively small severity of his allegations. This time, he managed to post bail again by the end of April and negotiated his way out of a cell and into house arrest. And it was there that he finally got to sit down with his lawyers and create a case to fight these allegations. Now, as far as the crimes are concerned, let's take a look at the facts. By law, in Japan, anyone making over 100 million yen, or roughly $1 million US, has to publicly disclose their salary. And in a culture where most people aren't actually paid exorbitant wages, this law sort of made sense. In 2010, the year that this law was introduced, Akio Toyoda, the chairman of Toyota, didn't even make enough money to meet the public disclosure threshold. That same year, Carlos Goen was making about 10 times that threshold, or about $10 million a year. This was much to the dismay of many Nissan executives who weren't even paid close to that amount. But compared to CEOs of the West, Goen was making average money. For example, the CEO of Ford, Alan Mulally, took home $25 million that year. From Goen's perspective, he was the CEO of 2, later 3 with Mitsubishi, separate automotive giants, and he was being paid less than American CEOs of just 1. And so, over the years, Goen's salary increased by millions and millions of dollars. But all of that was totally legal, fully approved pay for Carlos Goen. What wasn't quite so legal was the nearly $10 million a year that was secretly being allocated for Goen's retirement package. Now, Goen argues that, well, he never received any of this money because he never retired, and so he never had to disclose it. But clearly the Nissan board, as well as the Japanese government, disagreed. Perhaps more damning than his retirement package, though, was the nearly 8 million euros paid to Goen by the Nissan Mitsubishi BV holding company. This was an Amsterdam-based holding company that served very few purposes other than to take money and put it into Carlos Goen's pockets, without Nissan or Mitsubishi knowing about it. Goen's defense is that Nissan knew about it, and they were the ones that approved it, but either way, it doesn't seem like the most transparent way to earn a living. Beyond that, there were charges of Goen taking personal investment losses and using Nissan funds to settle them, Goen purchasing luxury properties all across the planet with Nissan money, as well as throwing lavish parties with, yup, Nissan footing the bill. But Goen says that Nissan was consulted on every single one of these things and the proper approvals were made. Nissan vehemently disagreed, yet at that point there wasn't really any strong evidence to support either side. And this might be just my opinion, but getting paid way too much money and living a lavish life sounds like standard fare behavior for any CEO. So why all this theater? Why was the Japanese government involved, when if Nissan had proof, they could easily have just had a board meeting and fired Carlos Goen? Well, Goen says, because the board is corrupt. As you may have picked up by now, Nissan never really saw eye to eye with their French partner. Renault's large stake of Nissan meant that they always had a controlling share of the Japanese car maker. And with Goen firmly planted in his seat up top, Nissan was never truly a Japanese company like Honda or Toyota. Goen's success over the years had always managed to keep those feelings at bay, but when Goen's performance started pulling Nissan further and further into the red, the board members became more and more irate with him. Goen himself says the final straw was his push to bring Renault and Nissan together by merging the two companies, an act that he himself said was to make Renault and Nissan unbreakable. Now, Japan's uniquely homogenous culture is home to a strong feeling of nationalism, and a full merger of the two companies meant that Nissan would never be able to again be independent from their French partners. And according to Goen, for the Japanese executives at Nissan, this was the line that couldn't be crossed, and where Goen claims the plot against him started. The plot was this. Harinada, a senior vice president at Nissan, began working with Japanese prosecutors in 2018 to build a case against Carlos Goen. Nada, along with other Nissan executives, essentially planned the steps they needed to take to get Carlos Goen arrested and subsequently dismissed from his positions at Nissan and Mitsubishi. Supposedly, they went even as far as to try and hack Carlos Goen's email to get more dirt on him. And of course, all this came to fruition in November of 2018 when Goen was arrested on that airport runway. The kicker of all this though, Harinada actually did strike a plea deal with Japanese prosecutors to ensure that he wouldn't be charged of any crimes. Why would he need to do that, you ask? Well, that's because he was part of the team that was responsible for fudging the books at Nissan, which he was more than happy to do until an internal investigation in Nissan essentially led them to his trail in 2018. And that's when he went to the prosecutors and struck a plea deal. So Nada was a snitch, sure, but the rest of the executives surely were acting in good faith, right? Well, maybe not. Because in 2019, news broke that the then acting CEO, Hiroto Saikawa, an executive that was integral in the case against Carlos Goen, had been illegally increasing his salary for years as well. Literally the exact same crime that Carlos Goen was accused of. And there are allegations that a handful of other executives were doing the exact same thing. So if it wasn't Goen's salary that led Nissan to turn on him, then maybe his conspiracy was right all along. Perhaps it really was a nationalistic effort by Nissan executives to thwart Goen's plan of merging Nissan and Renault. Essentially a last-ditch effort to keep Nissan as Japanese as possible. And if that was true, then maybe Goen had a real chance at making a case for himself in Japanese courts and proving that he was innocent, or at least not as guilty as they were making him out to be. But none of that mattered, because in late 2019, Carlos Goen broke his bail conditions and escaped Japan. December 29th, 2019. Michael Taylor, a former US Green Beret, and his son Peter were hired by Carlos Goen to help him escape Japan. The plan was surprisingly simple. Charter a jet from Japan to Turkey, stuff Carlos Goen into a concert equipment box, and then put him on the jet as cargo. The box was of course custom made to be big enough to fit Goen, but also big enough that it wouldn't fit in the x-ray machines at the airport. Goen was given a burner phone used to communicate with the Taylors to make sure he was okay, and that was it. The plane took off from Kansai International Airport and made its way to Turkey. And after landing in Turkey, Carlos Goen got out of the box and used his Lebanese passport to get a one-way ticket to Beirut. And that's where Goen is, to this very day, living in peace with his family, with no fear of extradition thanks to there not being any extradition treaty between Lebanon and Japan. The Japanese authorities didn't even find out until 2 days after he escaped, because they only checked their security camera footage once a week. So that's it. Goen was free. And just a week or so after this daring escape, a very charismatic Goen decided he was going to have a press conference in Beirut. He invited the world's press to come and listen to his side of the story and ask him whatever questions they wanted. And at that press conference, he seemed triumphant, deftly switching between English, Arabic, and French depending on who was asking him what question. And he sure wasn't shy about throwing his former colleagues under the bus. He told the world that he firmly believed that Harinada, Hiroto Saikawa, and the other Nissan executives colluded with the Japanese government to get rid of him and the French influence of Renault. He even called out specific prosecutors and government officials. He wasn't holding back. But of course he would say those things. He was the one being charged with the crimes. So far, there really wasn't anyone else crying foul, so it was hard to take Goen's word at face value. That is, until Ravinder Pasi, Nissan's topmost lawyer, blew the whistle on what was really going on behind closed doors. Posse had been leading an internal investigation into the Goen scandal since 2018. He worked very closely with the Nissan executive board and specifically Hari Nada, and that's when he started to discover some serious conflicts of interest. By 2019, Posse had found out that Hari Nada had struck a plea deal with Japanese prosecutors. And he found out that a number of executives like Saikawa, the standing CEO, had been taking massive amounts of illegal earnings through falsified share appreciation. This was huge. Not only did this show that Nissan's own executive board were doing the same crimes that Goen was accused of, but it was also proof positive that there was a significant conflict of interest, and the board was incentivized to throw Goen under the bus to save their own skin. Not only that, but the Japanese prosecutors surely weren't so inept to have missed this glaring detail in their investigation either. Yet, not once did the Japanese government think it was an issue when they needed board members to contribute information or be witnesses. Ravinder Posse, the Nissan lawyer, though, did see the issue in all this. And so, in an effort to help the investigation, he sent a memo to Nissan's board outlining his concerns. And he got no response. That is, until 3 days later, when he was notified that he was being removed from the Goen investigation team. Oh, and despite the fact that he had been living in Japan for the last 8 years and raising his kids there, he was being sent back to the UK. Oh, and he was being demoted from general counsel to a position in a tiny team of 3 people. Ravinder Posse, understandably, was caught off guard with all of this. He was just trying to help Nissan get a handle on this investigation, but as soon as he brought up that there might be something wrong, he got iced out. Not only that, but afterwards, Posse was followed by unmarked vehicles for months, with strange men taking pictures of him and his family. And not long after that, Yokohama police raided his house and confiscated his laptop and his mobile phone, saying that it was evidence. Posse later went on to say that this was Nissan and the Japanese police harassing and bullying him until he left both the company and the country of Japan, because now he had the potential to turn their entire case on its head. Ravinder Posse worked at Nissan for 16 years. And he was a close friend and colleague of Hari Nada and the rest of the executives. But as soon as he took one step out of line, Nissan and the Tokyo prosecutors essentially became the mafia, beating him down until they made him disappear. Also, they could make the law work for themselves. Carlos Goen, to this day, says there isn't a chance that he would get a fair trial in Japan. And even though the team that helped him escape, along with his close friend and colleague Greg Kelly, are facing years in prison, Goen still feels like he did the right thing. And considering the seemingly blatant corruption that still lives in Nissan HQ and the extremely questionable conduct of the Japanese authorities, I'm not sure if I can blame him. Carlos Goen certainly is an ultra-wealthy, cutthroat businessman who definitely put the almighty dollar above morals on many an occasion. But is he the villain in this story? If he is, then there's one thing for certain. There are far worse villains out there pretending to be heroes. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, please do drop us a like, and don't forget to subscribe. You could win $1,000. If you want to support the channel, you can buy one of these awesome t-shirts or join us on Patreon. And if you want to watch another cool video, just click on that thing right there. I'll see you guys next time.